I want to tell you something that I've never told anyone, and I need you to understand that I'm not being dramatic when I say that. I mean it literally. I have never spoken these words out loud. I've never typed them into a message. I've never written them down in the journal I kept for the 6 months after it happened, the one my therapist suggested. Because every time I tried, my hands would stop. Not shake stop, like my body understood something my mind refused to accept. I grew up in Harlan County, eastern Kentucky, in a town that doesn't appear on most maps. It shows up on some, the older ones, the Forest Service ones, from the 70s. But Google Maps will route you through it without ever naming it, and if you zoom in on satellite view, the canopy is so dense it swallows everything. Roads, structures, property lines, all gone beneath a carpet of ancient green. The town is called Varney. Technically, it's an unincorporated community. About 200 people, give or take. We had a church, a gas station that doubled as a general store, a volunteer fire department that hadn't responded to an actual fire in 11 years, and a post office that was open 3 days a week. That was Varney. That was my world for the first 18 years of my life. My father was a hunter. My grandfather was a hunter. My great-grandfather, whose name I share, Thomas Alder Wynne, was a hunter. The men in my family hunted the way other families went to church. It was ritual. It was identity. It was how we understood our place in the landscape. By the time I was 6, I could identify deer scat by freshness. By 10, I could field dress a whitetail in under 20 minutes. By 14, I had spent more nights sleeping in the woods than most adults spend camping in their entire lives. I knew that forest. I want to be clear about that. I knew it the way you know your own neighborhood, your own street, the cracks in your own ceiling. I knew where the creek split near the boulder that looked like a sleeping dog. I knew where the old fire road curved and the gravel turned to red clay after rain. I knew where the hemlocks grew so thick the ground stayed dark even at noon. I knew every ridge, every hollow, every game trail worn smooth by decades of deer and elk and black bear. Except one part. There was a section of the forest northwest, past the second ridgeline, beyond where Jessamine Creek drops into a gorge and the terrain gets steep and tangled that nobody hunted, nobody hiked, nobody talked about, not directly. If you'd asked me at 15 to explain why, I wouldn't have been able to give you a real answer. I would have said something vague. The terrain's bad. Nothing worth shooting out there. My dad never took me. And all of that would have been true, in the way that the surface of a lake is true, accurate, but concealing everything beneath it. The hunters in Varney had a name for it, though most of them wouldn't say it casually. They called it the lull. Not a valley, not a ridge, not a hollow. The lull. Like the silence between two sounds. Like the pause before something happens. I remember asking my father about it once, when I was maybe 12. We were sitting in a ground blind near a salt lick, waiting for a buck he'd been tracking for 2 seasons. I asked him, "Dad, what's out past the gorge?" And he didn't answer right away. He just kept looking through the scope. Then, without turning, he said, "Nothing you need." And that was the end of it. Not nothing's out there. Not it's too dangerous. Nothing you need. Like the place itself was a kind of answer to a question you shouldn't be asking. I left Varney when I was 18. Went to Lexington for school. Got a degree in forestry, which might seem ironic given what happened, but at the time it felt like the natural extension of everything I'd grown up doing. I worked for the Forest Service for a few years, then transitioned into private land management consulting. I got married, got divorced, moved to a small house outside of Berea, close enough to the mountains to feel them, but far enough from Varney to breathe. I didn't go home much. My mother had passed when I was 16. My father wasn't the type to ask you to visit. He'd answer the phone if you called. He'd nod if you showed up, but he didn't reach out. That was just how he was. Then, in October of 2021, he died. It was a heart attack. Happened in his sleep, which the doctor said was a mercy. I drove down for the funeral, handled the arrangements, sat in the front pew of the church I'd grown up in, and shook hands with people whose faces I recognized, but whose names I'd half forgotten. After the service, I went back to his house, my house, now technically, and started the slow, ugly work of sorting through a dead man's life. That's when I found the journal. It was in a footlocker in the basement, beneath a set of old army fatigues and a box of 30-06 cartridges that had to be 30 years old. The journal was leather-bound, the kind you'd buy at a craft fair, not a bookstore. No name on it, no date, just page after page of my father's handwriting, which I would have recognized anywhere tight, slanted, almost mechanical in its precision. Most of it was hunting logs, dates, locations, weather conditions, what he saw, what he shot, what he tracked. Mundane stuff, the kind of records a serious hunter keeps. But about 2/3 of the way through, the tone changed. The entries got shorter, the handwriting got less precise, and the locations stopped being specific. Instead of South Ridge, 200 yards east of the old fire road, the entries just said things like, near the edge, or closer than last time, or, on one page, just the word lull written 3 times, each time in smaller letters, like it was shrinking. The last entry in the journal was dated the 14th of November, 2019, 2 years before he died. It said, went to check the border markers, found one moved, not by weather, not by animal, moved toward the house, decided not to go back. Thomas should not come home. Thomas. That's me. I sat on the basement floor for a long time after reading that. The furnace clicked, on and off. The house settled around me in that way old houses do, with sounds that almost resemble language if you listen wrong. I told myself it was nothing. My father had been getting older. He lived alone. People get strange when they live alone in the woods for decades. They start assigning meaning to things that have no meaning. They start seeing patterns in randomness. I told myself that, and I believed it, mostly. But I didn't throw the journal away. I put it in my bag, and when I drove back to Berea the next day, I brought it with me. For the next 3 weeks, I didn't think about it much. I had work. I had the estate paperwork, which was more complicated than I expected because my father had never updated his will and there were questions about the property lines, some of which dated back to land grants from the 1800s. I hired a surveyor. I contacted the county clerk. I did normal things. Then the surveyor called me. His name was Dale Hutchins, a guy in his 60s who'd been surveying land in Harlan County for decades. He was professional, thorough, not the type to waste your time. But when he called, there was something in his voice that I noticed immediately. Not fear, exactly. More like hesitation, like he was choosing his words with unusual care. He said he'd completed most of the survey, but that there was a section of the property, the northwest boundary, where he'd run into some discrepancies. The county records showed one boundary line. The old deed showed another. And the physical markers on the ground, the iron pins and stone cairns that my grandfather had presumably placed decades ago, didn't match either document. Some of them appeared to have been moved. I asked him what he meant by moved. He said, "Mr. Wynne, I've been doing this work for 37 years. I know what erosion looks like. I know what tree fall does to a marker. I know what happens when a creek shifts. These pins were pulled and reset, deliberately. And the pattern, if you plotted them on a map, the new positions all shift the boundary inward, toward the house. Like someone was shrinking your property line from the northwest corner." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I thanked him. I asked him to send me the maps. He said he would, but then he paused and added, "I'll be honest with you. I didn't go past the gorge. The terrain gets rough, and my knees aren't what they used to be. But if you want that section surveyed, you'll need to hire someone younger, or go yourself." I told him that was fine. I told him I'd handle it. I didn't handle it. Not then. I put the maps in a drawer. I went back to work. I processed the estate. I sold my father's truck. I donated his clothes. I did everything that the living are supposed to do with the possessions of the dead, and I did it efficiently and without much emotion, because that's how I was raised. But the journal entry kept coming back to me. Found one moved. Not by weather, not by animal, moved toward the house. And now the surveyor was saying the same thing, independently. Markers moved. Boundary shifted, pulled inward, toward the house, from the direction of the lull. In December, I went back to Varney. I told myself it was to finish clearing out the house. There were still things in the attic, in the outbuildings, in the old workshop where my father used to reload his own ammunition. But the real reason, the one I admitted to myself only while driving, alone, on the winding 2-lane road through the mountains, was that I needed to see the markers. I needed to stand at the boundary and look at them with my own eyes. I arrived on a Friday evening. The house was exactly as I'd left it, except colder. I turned on the heat, checked the pipes, made sure nothing had frozen. The power was still on because I hadn't canceled it yet. I ate a sandwich I'd brought from a gas station in London, Kentucky, and I went to bed in my old room, which still had the same quilt on the bed, the same water stain on the ceiling, shaped vaguely like a hand. I woke up at 4 a.m. to absolute silence. And I don't mean quiet. I mean silence, the kind that feels physical. In the country, in the mountains, there's always sound at night. Insects, owls, the creak of trees, wind, something. But this was nothing. Like the air itself had been emptied. I lay there for maybe 10 minutes, listening so hard my ears started to ring, and then gradually, like a radio being turned back on, the sounds returned, a dog barking somewhere far off, the furnace clicking, normal sounds. I told myself I'd been half asleep. I told myself silence is a thing that happens. In the morning, I packed a day bag, water, compass, GPS unit, my father's old topographic map, and a sidearm, a Ruger, 44 Magnum, that had been his bear gun. I wasn't planning to go far. I just wanted to check the markers along the northwest boundary, compare them to the surveyor's map and the county records, and satisfy myself that there was a rational explanation. The walk to the northwest boundary takes about 90 minutes from the house, if you know the trails. I did. The first 40 minutes were easy old logging road, gentle grade, familiar trees. Then the terrain tilted upward, and the canopy thickened, and the undergrowth got dense enough that I had to push through laurel thickets in places. By the time I reached the ridgeline, I was sweating despite the December air. I stopped to drink water and check my position on the GPS. That's when I noticed the first marker. It was an iron pin, about 18 inches tall, driven into the ground at the base of a white oak. Standard boundary marker. But it was wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way. Not bent. Not broken. Wrong in its position. I'd been to this boundary dozens of times as a kid, following my father on property walks. The pin was supposed to be on the uphill side of the oak, near a flat rock we used as a landmark. It was now on the downhill side, about 15 feet southeast of where I remembered it, 15 feet closer to the house. I checked the surveyor's map. Dale had marked this pin's current position. I checked the county record. The county showed it where I remembered it uphill, by the rock. I checked the old deed map. Same. Someone had pulled an iron pin out of the ground and hammered it back in 15 feet away. I stood there, looking at it, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling I used to get as a kid, when I'd be walking alone in the woods and suddenly become aware that I was being watched. Not a sound, not a movement, a feeling, a change in the quality of the air, a pressure, like attention itself has weight. I shook it off. I moved to the next marker. Same thing. Shifted inward. About 20 feet this time. The iron pin was still solid, still firmly in the ground, but it was in the wrong place. I found the hole where it used to be a faint depression in the soil, partially filled in with leaf litter but still visible. I checked 4 markers that morning. All 4 had been moved. All 4 had been shifted toward the house. The displacement varied, some by 10 feet, some by nearly 30, but the direction was consistent, northwest to southeast, from the lull toward the house. I stood at the 4th marker and looked northwest, past the ridgeline, into the terrain I'd been taught to avoid. From where I was standing, I could see the ground drop away into the gorge where Jessamine Creek runs. Beyond that, the forest rose again, dense and dark, the trees so close together that the canopy formed a nearly solid mass. Even in December, with the hardwoods bare, the hemlocks and pines made it dark in there. I could feel it. The temperature dropped slightly. The wind died, and that quality of silence began to press against my ears again. I did not cross the gorge. Not that day. I went back to the house. I sat at the kitchen table with the maps spread out, and I drew the new boundary based on the moved markers. The result was unsettling. The original property line formed a rough rectangle that included everything up to and slightly beyond the gorge. The new line, the one created by the moved markers, cut off the gorge entirely and pulled the boundary back to the second ridgeline. Whoever had moved them hadn't done it randomly. They'd done it with precision. They'd created a buffer, a gap between the property and whatever was beyond it. Or, and this thought came to me slowly, like something surfacing from deep water, they hadn't created a buffer at all. Something else had moved the markers. Something on the other side had pushed the boundary toward us. I slept badly that night. I dreamed about my father standing at the edge of the gorge, looking across, not moving. In the dream, I called to him, but he didn't turn around. He just kept looking. And on the other side, in the trees, something was looking back. I couldn't see it. I just knew it was there. The next morning, I drove to the gas station Harbors, the only one in Varney, and talked to Carl Harbor, who'd run it since before I was born. Carl was in his 70s, thin as a fence post, with a voice like gravel in a coffee can. He'd known my father for 50 years. They'd hunted together when they were young. I didn't mention the markers at first. I just asked about the property, about whether anyone had been up there recently, whether there had been any trespassing issues. Carl said no, nothing like that. Said your father kept to himself the last few years, didn't hunt much anymore, didn't come into town much. Turned inward, Carl said, which was a generous way of saying my father had become a recluse. Then I asked about the lull. Carl was stacking cans of beans on a shelf. He stopped. He didn't turn around for a few seconds, and when he did, his face was different. Not scared. Something else. Something I'd call resigned. Your daddy ever talk to you about that? He asked. I said no. Not really. Carl set the can down and leaned against the counter. There's nothing out there that concerns you, Thomas. Your daddy knew that. He respected it. You should too. I said, Carl, someone moved the boundary markers on my property. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, no one moved anything. The boundary moved. There's a difference. I asked him what that meant. He said, it means some places aren't fixed. It means the land out there doesn't stay where you put your pins. It means your grandfather moved those markers 3 times, and your father moved them twice, and now you're going to move them again, or you're going to leave. And either way is fine, but you don't go past the gorge. You don't go into the lull. That's the rule. That's the only rule that matters. I asked him why. He wiped his hands on his apron and looked out the window toward the mountains. Because the people who go in don't come out the same, and the ones who go in deep don't come out at all. He wouldn't say more. I bought a coffee and left. That evening, I went through my father's workshop. I found things I expected: reloading equipment, gun oil, boxes of brass casings, sorted by caliber. But I also found things I didn't expect. In a drawer beneath the workbench, wrapped in an oilcloth, there was a bundle of stakes, not iron boundary pins. Wooden stakes, about 2 feet long, sharpened at one end, with symbols carved into the wood. Not letters, not numbers. Geometric patterns, circles inside triangles, lines radiating outward, shapes that repeated in sequences I couldn't parse. They looked old. The wood was dark with age, and the carvings had been filled with something sap, maybe, or resin that had hardened into a black, glassy substance. There were 9 of them. I laid them out on the workbench and studied them. Each one was different, but they shared a visual language, the same basic shapes recombined in different configurations. I photographed them all with my phone and spent an hour that night searching online for any reference to similar markings. I found nothing exact. Some superficial resemblance to Appalachian folk magic symbols, some vague overlap with certain Cherokee protective markings, but nothing that matched precisely. Beneath the stakes, in the same drawer, I found a hand-drawn map. My father's handwriting again, but less precise than in the journal. More hurried. The map showed the property from an aerial perspective, and along the northwest boundary, he'd drawn a series of X marks, 9 of them, corresponding, I assumed, to the 9 stakes. Between the X marks and the gorge, he'd drawn a heavy line and written one word: hold. Below the map, in smaller letters, they test the line every November. Replace stakes before first frost. Do not let the line break. Do not go past the line to check. Stay on this side. Always stay on this side. I sat in that workshop until midnight, reading those words over and over. They test the line. Every November. Replace stakes. Do not let the line break. My father had been maintaining something. A perimeter. A barrier. For how long? The journal went back years, but the stakes looked older than that. Decades older. My grandfather's work, maybe. Or older still. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights on and the Ruger on the coffee table, and I listened to the house and the woods beyond it, and I tried to think clearly. I'm a rational man. I have a degree in forestry. I've spent my professional life managing land, understanding ecosystems, working with data and maps and soil composition. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in curses. I don't believe the land is alive in any sentient way. But I also grew up in these mountains, and there's a kind of knowledge that exists in places like Varney that doesn't fit neatly into any framework I learned in school. It's not superstition, exactly. It's more like institutional memory, generations of people observing the same place, the same patterns, the same anomalies, and developing protocols to deal with them, not understanding them, just managing them. The way you don't need to understand electricity to know not to touch a live wire. In the morning, I made a decision. I was going to replace the stakes. Not because I believed they did anything, but because my father had believed it, and his father before him, and the stakes were part of the property, part of the legacy, part of whatever strange covenant my family had maintained with this land. I would replace them, and then I would leave, and I would sell the property, and I would never come back. That was the plan. I spent the morning preparing. I sharpened the stakes with a hatchet. I packed them in a canvas bag with the hand-drawn map. I loaded the Ruger. I filled 2 water bottles. I put on boots and layers and a blaze orange vest out of habit, even though I wasn't hunting. I checked the weather clear, cold, no precipitation expected. I told myself I'd be back by dark. The walk out was the same as before. Logging road, ridge, laurel thickets. I reached the first moved boundary marker by 10 in the morning. I consulted my father's map. The first stake position was marked about 50 yards beyond the iron pin, between 2 hemlocks on the lip of the gorge. I found the spot easily. There was a hole in the ground where an old stake had been rotted away, just a dark smear in the soil. I drove the new stake in with a rock, angling it northwest, toward the lull, the way the map seemed to indicate. The moment the stake went into the ground, I felt something change. I don't know how to describe it except to say the forest noticed. Not a sound, not a movement, a shift in attention, like I'd spoken in a quiet room, and every head had turned. The air didn't change temperature. The wind didn't pick up. Nothing visible happened, but something was now aware of me, in a way it hadn't been before. I told myself it was adrenaline. I moved to the second position. The second stake went in easier. The third, too. I was following the gorge's edge, moving roughly east to west, placing stakes at intervals of about 100 yards. By the time I reached the fourth position, I was deep into the boundary, farther northwest than I'd been in years. The trees here were different, older, thicker, with bark that was almost black. The hemlocks blocked most of the light, and the ground was covered in a thick carpet of dead needles that muffled my footsteps. It was quiet. Not the aggressive silence of that first night, but a held-breath quiet, the quiet of something waiting. I placed the 4th stake, the 5th, the 6th. At the 7th position, I found something that made me stop. There was already a stake in the ground. Not one of my father's, not one of the old rotted ones. A new stake, fresh wood, pale and clean, sharpened to a point, driven into the soil at exactly the position marked on my father's map. And it had symbols on it. Not my father's symbols. Different ones. The same geometric language circles, triangles, radiating lines but arranged in patterns I hadn't seen on any of the 9 stakes in the drawer. This was someone else's work. Recent. I crouched down and touched it. The wood was smooth. The carvings were precise, made with a sharp blade, not a rough tool, and the resin filling the carvings was still slightly tacky. This stake had been placed within the last few days. Someone else was maintaining the line. I looked around. The forest was empty. No tracks in the needle carpet that I could see. But hemlock needles don't hold prints well. No sound. No movement. Just trees and silence and the gorge falling away to my left, and beyond it, the dark mass of the lull. I placed my 7th stake next to the one that was already there. I don't know why. It felt wrong to remove the other one. I moved on. The 8th position was at the far western end of the boundary, where the gorge narrowed, and the 2 sides drew close enough that you could almost jump across. Almost. The gap was maybe 8 feet, and below it, Jessamine Creek ran fast and white over sharp rocks. On the other side, the lull began. From here, I could see into it for the first time. I don't know what I expected. Something dramatic, maybe. A wall of darkness, an absence of trees, some clear demarcation between the normal forest and whatever was beyond. But it didn't look like that. It looked like more forest, the same hemlocks, the same undergrowth, the same rocky terrain continuing on the other side of the gorge. If anything, it looked healthier. The trees were taller. The moss was thicker. The ferns, even in December, had a green vitality that seemed wrong for the season. But there was something else. Something I noticed only after I'd been staring for a minute or two. There were no animals. I don't mean I didn't see animals. I mean there was no evidence of animals at all. No bird calls, no squirrel activity, no deer tracks on the muddy banks of the creek on the other side, no scat, no browse marks on the low branches. Nothing. The forest on the other side of the gorge was completely, perfectly empty of animal life. Except that it wasn't. Because as I stood there, driving the 8th stake into the cold ground, I became aware of something standing among the trees on the other side. I say became aware, because I didn't see it arrive. It was just there, the way a detail in a painting is there once you notice it. A shape, partially obscured by a hemlock trunk, about 30 yards into the lull. It was tall, taller than a person, thin. The color of bark, or maybe the color of nothing, the color of the space between trees. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, oriented toward me. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see features. It was like looking at a figure made of static, or heat shimmer, or the visual noise your eyes produce in low light. My brain kept trying to resolve it into something recognizable. A dead tree, a shadow, a trick of the light. But it wouldn't resolve. It stayed at the edge of recognition, almost a shape, almost a figure, almost there. I stared at it. It did not move. I want to tell you that I ran. I want to tell you that I dropped the stakes and sprinted back along the gorge, and didn't stop until I reached the house. But I didn't. I stood there, 8 feet of empty air, and rushing water between me and whatever was on the other side. and I stared, and it stared back, or at least, it was oriented toward me in a way that felt like staring, and I felt something I've never felt before. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was recognition, like seeing a word written in a language you don't speak but somehow understanding its meaning. The thing on the other side of the gorge was not an animal. It was not a person. It was not anything I had a name for. But it was real, and it was aware, and it had been there for a very long time, and it knew my family. That's the part that broke something in me. The knowledge, and it was knowledge, not a guess, not an inference, that this thing recognized me, that it had seen my father standing where I was standing, and my grandfather, and my great-grandfather, that the stakes, the markers, the line, all of it was a conversation, a negotiation, a boundary maintained by both sides for reasons that neither side fully understood but both respected. I drove the 8th stake in. The shape on the other side didn't move. I walked to the 9th position. This one was farther east, back along the gorge, at a point where a massive fallen hemlock bridged the gap. The trunk was thick enough to walk across. It had fallen years ago, decades maybe, and its root ball still clung to the earth on my side, while its crown rested in the dark soil of the lull, a natural bridge. Someone had cut handholds into the bark. I stared at that. Old cuts, weathered, but deliberate. Someone, at some point, had carved grips into the fallen tree to make it easier to cross. And on the other side, at the base of the tree's crown, I could see a trail. Not a game trail, a human trail. Narrow, but worn, leading into the lull. I placed the 9th stake. My hands were shaking. I stepped back from the gorge. I turned around, and I began walking home. But I only made it about 200 yards before I stopped. I stopped because I could hear something. Behind me, from the direction of the gorge, from the direction of the lull. It was faint, it was rhythmic, and it was, unmistakably, a human voice. Not words, not exactly. A sound, repeated, rising and falling in a pattern that was almost musical but not quite. A hum, a drone, like someone sustaining a single vowel sound and letting it oscillate in their throat. It was coming from across the gorge. I turned around. There was nothing visible. The shape was gone. The trees on the other side were just trees again. But the sound continued, low, steady, patient, like it had been going on for a long time and I was only now hearing it. I stood there for 5 minutes, listening. The sound didn't change. It didn't get louder or quieter. It just was, the way wind is, the way water is, constant. And the longer I listened, the more I felt something loosening inside my chest, a tension I hadn't known I was carrying, a tightness behind my eyes. The sound was doing something to me, and the something felt like relief, and that's what finally scared me, because I know what lures sound like. I've used them my whole life. I've called in turkeys and deer and elk with sounds designed to mimic safety, companionship, the promise of something needed. And this sound, this low, oscillating hum from the dark trees, was a lure. I walked back to the house. I walked fast. I didn't run, because running felt like it would change something, would escalate something, would shift the dynamic between me and whatever was producing that sound. I walked with purpose, and I didn't look back, and I didn't stop until I was inside the house, with the door locked and every light on. It was 3 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, and through the kitchen window, looking northwest, I could see the ridgeline against the sky, and beyond it, the darkness of the deep canopy, and I could still hear the sound, faintly, at the very edge of perception, a hum, coming from the mountains. I poured myself a glass of my father's bourbon. There was still a bottle in the cabinet above the stove, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I opened his journal to the last entry. Thomas should not come home. I understood it now, not as a warning about the property or the estate, as a warning about me, about what I would do, because my father knew me. He knew that I would find the journal. He knew I would find the stakes. He knew that I would go to the boundary, and he knew somehow, with a certainty that only a parent can have about their child, that I wouldn't be able to stop there. He was right. I lasted 3 days. 3 days of sitting in that house, feeling the hum. It wasn't constant. It came and went, always from the northwest, always at the edge of hearing. Sometimes I wasn't sure it was real. Sometimes I'd go outside and stand in the yard and listen, and hear nothing but wind and birds and normal forest sounds, and I'd think, okay, I imagined it. I was stressed, the altitude, the grief, the isolation. And then I'd go back inside and sit in the quiet living room, and there it would be again. A vibration more than a sound. A presence more than a vibration. The lull, humming to itself. Or to me. On the 3rd day, I went back to Harbors and asked Carl if he knew about the fallen tree across the gorge, the one with the handholds cut into it. Carl's face went very still. Who cut those holds, Carl? He shook his head slowly. That tree fell before I was born. Before your granddaddy was born. Probably. Someone carved handholds into it. Someone made it into a bridge. I know. Who? He looked at me the way you look at someone who's standing on the edge of something high. Not with fear for himself. With fear for me. There have been people who crossed, over the years. Not many. Not recently. But it's happened. Some of them came from this side. Some of them, Thomas, I'm going to tell you something, and you need to hear it the way I mean it, not the way it sounds. Some of them came from the other side. I waited. There's a woman lives up on Crane Ridge. Martha Parson. She's 93 years old. She'll tell you, if you ask her right, that her grandmother came out of the lull. Walked out of those trees in 1903, barefoot, carrying a baby, speaking a language nobody in Varney recognized, learned English in a year, never spoke about where she came from, never went back. Lived in Varney until she died in 1961. Normal woman, good neighbor, raised 5 children. But she never ever went past the 2nd ridgeline, and she taught her children to stay away. And she's the one, or so the story goes, who placed the first stakes. I asked Carl what was in the lull, what the thing was that I'd seen across the gorge. He said, I don't know what you saw, and I'm not going to guess, but I'll tell you what my father told me, which is what his father told him. The lull isn't empty. It's full. Full of something that's been here longer than us, longer than the Cherokee, longer than anyone. Something that doesn't think the way we think, or want the way we want. It's not evil. It's not good. It's other. And the line, the stakes, the markers, the rules about not crossing, that's not to keep it in. It's to keep the agreement. We stay on our side. It stays on its side. And in between, there's the line. And the line holds, as long as someone maintains it. 1. What happens if the line breaks? Carl wiped the counter. I don't know. Nobody alive knows, and I'd like to keep it that way. I drove back to the house. I sat in the truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, engine off, looking at the tree line. The hum was there, faint, patient. I went inside. I opened the footlocker again. This time I went deeper. Beneath the journal, beneath the stakes, beneath everything, there was a photograph. Black and white, creased, faded at the edges. It showed a group of men standing in the forest. 6 of them. They were dressed in early 20th century work clothes, suspenders, heavy boots, brimmed hats. They were standing at the edge of the gorge. I recognized the location. The fallen hemlock was visible in the background, smaller then, the bark still rough and light. The men were my family. I could see the resemblance in the faces, the wind jaw, the wind brow, the same faces I'd seen in my bathroom mirror every morning of my life. They were all looking across the gorge, and on the other side, blurred, almost indistinguishable from the trees, but unmistakably present, there was a shape. Tall, thin, the color of bark. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, older than my father's, older than my grandfather's, someone had written, "The agreement, 1911. Do not cross. Do not break the line. Do not listen to the sound. Do not listen to the sound." I put the photograph down. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like gravity, that I was going to cross. Not because I wanted to. Not because I was brave, or stupid, or curious in the way that kills. Because the sound was already inside me. It had been inside me since the first night I'd heard the silence. That absolute, physical silence that I now understood wasn't silence at all. It was the sound, played so low that my conscious mind couldn't hear it, but my body could. It had been calling me. Maybe it had been calling me my whole life, from across the mountains, from across the years, from the deep green dark of a place that doesn't appear on any map. Thomas should not come home. But Thomas was already home. Thomas had always been home. I went the next morning. I didn't pack much. Water, the Ruger, a flashlight, the photograph, folded into my jacket pocket. I didn't bring the journal. I didn't bring the map. I wasn't following a plan anymore. I was following the sound. The walk to the gorge took an hour. The stakes were all in place, mine and the stranger's. 9 points of negotiation marking a line between this world and whatever the lull was. I passed each one and felt its presence like a gate. By the time I reached the fallen hemlock, the bridge, the hum was so clear, it was almost a melody, not a tune, a structure. Patterns within patterns, rising and falling with a mathematical precision that felt organic, like the branching of trees or the spiral of a shell. I put my hand on the first handhold. The wood was cold and smooth, polished by age and by the palms of whoever had carved it. I could feel the gorge beneath me, the air rising from the creek, the spray on my face. I took a step, then another. The tree was wide enough to walk on, but barely, and the bark was slick with moisture. I kept my hand on the holds. I didn't look down. Halfway across, the sound changed. It got louder. Not in volume exactly, but in presence. Like it was no longer coming from a direction. Like it was coming from everywhere. From the air. From the wood beneath my feet. From my own chest. I could feel it in my teeth. In my sinuses. In the spaces between my bones. It wasn't unpleasant. It was immense. It was the sound of something ancient and vast and patient and alive, and it was welcoming me. I reached the other side. The moment my foot touched the ground on the far bank of the gorge, everything changed. The first thing I noticed was the light. It was wrong. It was mid-morning, maybe 9:30, and the sky above had been clear, pale winter blue. But here, under the canopy of the lull, the light was golden, warm. The kind of light you see in late afternoon in September, when the sun is low and the world turns amber. It was beautiful. It was wrong. The second thing I noticed was the temperature. It had been in the low 30s. Here it was warm, not hot, comfortable, like a spring day, like May. The third thing I noticed was the growth. The trees were immense, not just tall, old in a way that I could feel. The hemlocks were the largest I'd ever seen, their trunks wider than cars, their canopy so far above me, it was like looking up in a cathedral. The ferns on the ground were waist-high and brilliant green. Moss covered everything: rocks, roots, lower branches in a coat so thick and soft it looked like velvet. The air smelled like rain and earth and something else, something sweet, like sap or honey. And the sound was everywhere. I followed the trail, the human trail, the one I'd seen from the other side. It wound between the great trees, through the ferns, over roots thick as my thigh. It was well worn. Not fresh, not recent. This trail had been walked for generations. The soil was compacted. The ferns grew around it, not over it. Whoever had made this path had used it often. I walked for 20 minutes. The forest didn't change. Same massive trees, same impossible light, same warmth, same hum. I saw no animals, no birds, no insects, no spiders in the corners of bark, no ants on the ground, nothing. Just plant life, enormous and vibrant, and silent, except for the sound. Then I came to the clearing. It wasn't large, maybe 40 feet across, a gap in the canopy where the golden light poured down like water. The ground was covered in moss so thick and uniform it looked like a lawn. And in the center of the clearing, there was a structure. I don't know what to call it. It wasn't a building, exactly. It was made of wood and stone, but not in any way I recognized. The wood was shaped curved, bent into forms that shouldn't have been possible, without breaking into a kind of frame or lattice that rose from the ground in spiraling columns. The stone was fitted between the wood, not mortared, just placed with such precision that the surfaces were flush. The whole thing was about 8 feet tall and roughly cylindrical, open at the top, with an interior that I couldn't see from where I was standing. Around the structure, arranged in a circle at regular intervals, there were more stakes, dozens of them. Same design as the ones in my father's drawer, same geometric symbols, same black resin but larger, much larger. Some were 3 feet tall, and they were all pointing outward, away from the structure, as if they were radiating from it, as if the structure was the source, and the stakes were its signal. I walked to the edge of the clearing. I did not enter it. Something about the boundary felt important. The moss formed a perfect circle, and outside it, the ferns and undergrowth began. Inside, nothing but moss, and the structure and the stakes. The hum was centered here, not louder, but more present, more specific. It was coming from the structure. I stood at the edge for a long time. Minutes, maybe longer. Time felt different here. Not distorted exactly, but less relevant, less insistent. Like the lull didn't measure itself in hours and minutes. It measured itself in something else. Cycles, patterns, seasons that didn't match ours. Then I heard a voice. Not the hum, a voice. Human, speaking English, coming from behind me, on the trail. You shouldn't have crossed. I spun around. A woman was standing on the trail, about 20 feet away. She was old 70, maybe 80, but upright and steady, dressed in plain work clothes, her gray hair pulled back. She had a face I didn't recognize, but her eyes were the Win eyes, dark brown, almost black, set deep, slightly downturned at the outer corners. My eyes, my father's eyes. "Who are you?" I asked. She studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "My name is Ellen. Ellen Wynne. I'm your father's sister." My father didn't have a sister. I said that. I said it out loud. My father didn't have a sister. She nodded, like she'd expected that. He did. I was born in 1951. I crossed in 1972. I've been here since. I stared at her. She was real, solid. The light fell on her the same way it fell on the trees. Her boots were muddy. Her hands were calloused. She was as real as I was. "That's not possible," I said. And even as I said it, I knew it was a stupid thing to say. Because I was standing in a forest where the light was the wrong color, and the temperature was the wrong season, and the trees were the wrong size, and a sound that wasn't a sound was emanating from a structure that shouldn't exist. "It's possible," she said. "It's just not something that makes sense on your side. Time is different here. Not faster or slower. Different. It folds. You can live a long time in the lull, and the world outside moves on without you. And when you go back, if you go back, everything has changed." "Why did you cross?" She looked at the clearing, at the structure, The same reason you did. The sound. It calls certain people. Not everyone. Certain bloodlines. The winds have always been one. It's why your family maintains the line, not to keep the lull out, to keep the winds from going in. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not literally, perceptually. The entire framework of my understanding tilted, and what had been the ceiling became the floor. The stakes weren't protection. The line wasn't a barrier against something hostile. It was a fence around a field that you desperately wanted to enter. It was a lock on a door that opened onto something so beautiful, and so alien, and so profoundly wrong, that once you stepped through it, you might never choose to step back. You need to leave, Ellen said. Now, before you hear the second sound. What's the second sound? The first sound calls you in. The second sound makes you stay. If you hear it, you won't want to leave. You won't be able to want to leave. The wanting goes away. I looked at the clearing, the golden light, the impossible structure, the moss like a carpet, like a welcome mat, like an invitation written in the language of the earth itself. Is it bad here? I asked. Is this a trap? A prison? Ellen looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite sadness. No, she said. It's not bad. It's not a trap. It's the most beautiful place I've ever been, and that's why you have to leave. I didn't understand. I said so. She walked closer. She put her hand on my arm. Her grip was strong. Her skin was warm. She was real. She was my father's sister, and she was real, and she had been here for 50 years. I have children here, she said quietly. 3 of them. Born here. They've never seen the other side. They don't look entirely like me. They don't think like me. They are partly of this place, and I love them, and I will never leave. But I chose this, Thomas. I chose it because I heard the second sound, and I couldn't choose otherwise. Do you understand? I didn't decide to stay. The decision was made for me, by a sound, and I have been happy, truly, deeply happy, every day since, and that terrifies me. Because happiness without choice isn't happiness. It's something else, something this place does to you, something the sound does to you, and I don't want that for you. Your father didn't want it for you. Please, go. The hum shifted, slightly, barely perceptibly, but I felt it a deepening, a richness, like a chord, adding a new note. The second sound was beginning. I could feel it at the edges of my hearing, and already, I could feel something in my chest, loosening, softening, opening, like a flower turning toward a sun that wasn't real. Ellen squeezed my arm. Now. Go now. I went. I turned away from the clearing and I walked back up the trail, and the golden light followed me, and the sound followed me, and I could feel it pulling at me, gently, persistently, the way the tide pulls at your ankles, and with every step, it got harder. Not physically. The walking was easy. The wanting was hard. I wanted to stop. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to go back to the clearing and sit on the moss and close my eyes and let the sound fill me until there was nothing else. But I kept walking, because Ellen's face had told me something her words hadn't. She had said she was happy, and she was. I believed her. But behind her eyes, in the deep creases at their corners, in the way her mouth held itself when she wasn't speaking, there was something else, a knowledge, a recognition that the happiness she felt wasn't hers. It was the lulls, given to her, installed in her, a happiness she couldn't remove even if she wanted to, and she couldn't want to because that wanting had been taken away, and she knew this, she could see it clearly, and she was powerless before it. That's the horror, not the dark trees, not the thing across the gorge, not the ancient structure, or the impossible light. The horror is a happiness you didn't choose. A peace that was given to you by something you don't understand, and the inability to refuse it, and the knowledge cold, clear, permanent, that you should refuse it, and the absolute impossibility of doing so. I reached the gorge. I crossed the fallen hemlock. I didn't use the handholds. I crawled. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip anything. When I reached the other side, I collapsed on the cold ground and lay there, face in the dirt, breathing the sharp December air, and I felt the sound receding, not disappearing, receding, pulling back, returning to its place beyond the line, beyond the stakes, beyond the boundary that my family had maintained for more than a century. I lay there until the cold made me move. Then I got up and walked home. I didn't go back to the gorge. I didn't remove the stakes. I didn't sell the property. I maintained the line. I drive down to Varney every October now. I check the stakes. I replace the ones that have rotted. I check the markers. Some of them have moved always inward, always toward the house. I push them back. I don't know if the iron pins matter the way the wooden stakes do. I don't know if any of it matters. But I do it because my father did it, and his father did it, and his mother's mother. The woman who walked out of the lull in 1903 started it. I do it because the sound is still there. Every time I go, I hear it. Faint, patient, waiting, and every time, it's a little harder to turn around. I've started carving the symbols into new stakes. I don't know how I know what patterns to use. The knowledge was in my hands, somehow, the first time I picked up a knife and a length of ash wood. My fingers moved without instruction. The shapes came out of me like a language I'd spoken once and forgotten. Last October, when I went to check the line, I found something new. At the 7th position, the spot where the stranger's stake had been, there were 2 stakes, mine and someone else's. But this time, the new stake was different. It was ash wood, freshly carved, with symbols that matched the ones I'd been making. Exactly, pattern for pattern, line for line. Someone else was carving these same shapes. Someone on my side. Someone who knew. At the base of the stake, there was a stone, flat, smooth, river-polished. On it, scratched into the surface with a sharp tool, was a single word. Hold. I don't know who placed it. I don't know how many others there are. I don't know how large the network is, how many bloodlines, how many boundaries, how many lines held by how many families in how many mountains across how many centuries. I don't know what the lull is, whether it's one place or many places, whether it's connected beneath the surface, the way rivers are connected underground. I don't know what lives there. I don't know what it wants. I know that it's patient. I know that it calls. I know that the people who go in don't come out the same, and the ones who go in deep don't come out at all. I know that my aunt is there, and she's happy, and that happiness is the most frightening thing I've ever encountered. And I know that every year, when I drive back to Berea after checking the line, I turn on the radio and I drive with the windows open, and I let the noise of the highway and the wind fill my car until there's no room for anything else. Because in the silence, in any silence, now, in any quiet room, in any still moment I can hear it. The hum, the first sound, the invitation. It's quieter at a distance, but it's never gone. I don't think it will ever be gone. My name is Thomas Alder Wynne. I maintain the line. I hold the boundary. I keep the agreement that my family made with something that has no name, in a part of the forest that even hunters refuse to enter. And every year, it gets a little harder to come back.